Thanks, Tom. Well, everyone's been scratching their heads over the citizenship status of Samima Begum, holed up in a refugee camp in Syria with a new baby, unrepentant of her support for ISIS. So the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, wrote to her family here, and I'm paraphrasing, he wrote to them asking them to pass a message on to her that she's no longer British. Can he do that, really, and the baby? Yvette Cooper raised the issue in the Commons today, but Mr Javid, well, you judge for yourself, but I thought he sounded less sure in his answer in the Commons than he did in his letter to Samima Begum's parents.
In every single situation, there is no question of making anyone stateless under any circumstances. And not only would that be unlawful, but I think it would be morally wrong as well to make someone stateless. And that is not something that we would do. And in any case that I can give a short, certainly any decision that I've made, I'm perfectly comfortable that the analysis is done properly in each case by expert legal advisors, and that I wouldn't make such a decision unless I was absolutely confident on the statelessness issue.
Right, so he seems hesitant but confident that she's not going to be made stateless. There is news now from Bangladesh. Remember, he's saying she's not stateless because she's a Bangladeshi citizen, although she's not really spent much any time there. Bangladesh has now spoken and said there's no question of her being allowed into Bangladesh. And the government of Bangladesh is deeply concerned that she has erroneously been identified as a holder of dual citizenship. This was the State Minister of Foreign Affairs statement issued to The Guardian. He added that the government had learned of Britain's move to cancel her citizenship rights from media reports. Bangladesh asserts she is not a Bangladeshi citizen. She's British by birth, never applied for dual nationality. There is no question of her being allowed into Bangladesh. They couldn't have been clearer. And what of her baby, born to a British mother? He hasn't done anything wrong, to our knowledge. We asked the Home Office several times if they could clarify whether the child was a British citizen. A spokesperson responded, "We don't routinely comment on individual cases." Well, Ian MacDonald, a barrister, former special advocate at the Special Immigration Appeal Court. I want to get to the baby with you, Ian, but let's just start on Shamima herself. What do you make of where we are, and particularly with Bangladesh saying she's nothing to do with us?
I think that's interesting news because I think that it's quite wrong for the Secretary of State to shuffle off responsibility for a British citizen onto a country that she's never been in, and who now appear to have said that they don't want her anyhow, which I would have thought would have been as clear as anything that they would not want to have anyone who had been part of a terrorist organisation.
I wonder whether it would be considered impolite not to have talked to Bangladesh about a decision. If your argument is based on her being a dual citizen, and one of the countries is going to revoke, I mean, you'd think you might have some contact with the other country.
Well, you'd think you might have contact with them. Absolutely necessary, I would have thought. But you also, before you start making decisions like that, you ought to have had contact with her and at least had some kind of interview.
Well, that's pretty difficult if she's in Syria, presumably. You're not going to send someone out there to talk to her, are you?
Clearly not. Then you don't. I think that's very much a knee-jerk reaction by the Secretary of State on this particular thing.
Tell me about the child.
Well, the child would normally be a British national by descent immediately on birth, because the mother would be a British citizen. And on that basis, even if they took away her nationality, she would, as his prime carer, he as a British citizen would have a right to come to Britain, and she would have a right under EU law to accompany him to Britain.
She would be able to accompany him because
she's the prime carer of her.
Even though she's not a British citizen. So the child can bring a mother in, basically,
yes,
even if the mother isn't.
Under EU law, but how long that will last, I don't know.
Would you, if you were taking this to the special, sorry, I keep getting SIAC, Special Immigration Appeals Court,
yes,
would you win this on her behalf if you were fighting it for her?
You can never determine whether you would win it, but I think the Secretary of State would have had a very hard time number one, there'd be a question of fairness, because she would have to have a possibility of taking a real part in that, and giving evidence and being examined and all the rest of it. And secondly, in the appeal, the family law rights that her son in particular and she has are part of the decision making in an appeal against a deprivation.
Ian MacDonald, thank you very much for coming in. Well, in Iraq and Syria, there are other cases similar to Shamima Begum's, with large numbers of foreign nationals from around the world. And let's get an idea of the scale of that with Joana Cook, Dr. Joana Cook, Senior Research Fellow at the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation. That's at King's College in London. Very good evening to you. Can you give us some idea of how many people we're talking about in Shamima Begum's position?
Sure. Well, we know that if we look at Shamima Begum, she is one of 145 British women that joined the so-called Islamic State. If we look more broadly at Western Europe, that number increases to over 1,000. And in a data set that me and my colleague Gina Vale established last year, we looked at 80 countries and determined at least 4,761 women from these 80 countries. But I would caveat this by saying we believe this is a vast underestimation, because half of these countries don't even provide data on the number of women that went.
And what about children? I mean, we're hearing here the child may have a very strong claim to be in the UK. What about the number of children who we might expect wanting to come back to the country from, of their citizenship, or come for the first time to their country of citizenship?
Of course, and the issue of minors is particularly challenging because a majority of these were victims of this organization. If we look at Western Europe alone, we accounted for about 1,500 minors. And I think what's really significant here is that at least 566 of those were born in Iraq and Syria to at least one Western European parent. So we don't yet even have the full scale and scope of the number of minors that were born to foreign parents over there. But again, if Western Europe is any indication, if 566 of the 1,500 minors being accounted for now were born over there, globally this is a significant concern going forward, and the proactive management and repatriation of these minors is crucial for managing this generation going forward.
Which country has the biggest issue to deal with in this respect? I mean, which country has the most who would be saying they need to come?
Yeah, certainly. So there's a number of countries that had multiple thousands of foreign affiliates that became associated with ISIS. We look at Russia, there are about 5,000. If we come over to Western Europe, we look at France that had about 1,900 total affiliates, of which 382 of those were women, upwards of 700 of those minors. In the UK, we're looking at over 850 individuals. So there's a number of countries that have very large numbers of these individuals to respond to today.
Joana Cook, thank you very much for filling us in on all the scale of this.